Central African Republic Fast Facts. Here's a look at the Central African Republic. It is a landlocked country in Central Africa, bordering Cameroon, Chad, Democratic Republic of the Congo, South Sudan and Sudan. About the Central African Republic, from the CIA World Factbook. Area: 622,984 sq kilometers, slightly smaller than Texas. Population: 5,990,855, July 2020 est. Taking into account excess mortality from AIDS, median age 19.8 years. Capital: Bangui. Ethnic groups: Baya 33%, Banda 27%, Mandjia 13%, Sara 10%, Mboum 7%, Mbaka 4%, Yakoma 4%, other 2%. Religion: 50% Christian, 35% Indigenous beliefs, 15% Muslim, according to U.S. State Department, 2018 GDP, purchasing power parity, $3.39 billion, 2017 est. GDP per capita, $700, 2017 est. Unemployment, 6.9%, 2017 est. Other facts: since gaining independence from France in 1960, many of its presidents have been ousted through unconstitutional means. Despite natural resources, including gold, timber, diamonds and uranium, the Central African Republic, CAR, is among the poorest nations in the world. CAR is a possible hideout of Joseph Kony, the brutal leader of the Lord Resistance Army, LRA. The Seleka, a coalition of rebels predominantly from a Muslim region, forced President François Bozize from office in March 2013. CAR has since been plagued by violence between Christians and Muslims. As of February 2020, there are more than 600,136 internally displaced persons and more than 611,000 refugees outside the country. Source: UNHCR, Government, CNARR, Timeline 1894. The territory of Ubangi-Chari, is brought under French colonial rule. 1910 Ubangi-Chari joins with 3 other dependencies to form French Equatorial Africa, EAF. December 1958 becomes an autonomous republic within the French community, with Barthélemy Banda serving as prime minister until his death in 1959. August 13, 1960 achieves full independence from France as the Central African Republic. David Dacko becomes the first president. 1962 President Dacko declares Social Evolution Movement of Black Africa, MESAN, the only legal political party. 1964 Dacko runs unopposed and is formally elected president. December 31, 1965, Dacko is overthrown in a military coup led by Jean-Bédel Bokassa, commander of the armed forces. January 1966 CAR's constitution is rescinded and the legislature is dissolved. 1972 Bokassa makes himself president for life. 1976 Bokassa proclaims himself emperor of the newly renamed Central African Empire. September 20, 1979, Bokassa is deposed in a coup by Dacko, with French backing. September 1, 1981 General André Kalingba leads a coup removing Dacko from power and establishes a military government. November 29, 1986 Kalingba is sworn in as constitutional president. October 1992 multi-party presidential elections are held, but the results are later annulled by the Supreme Court due to voting irregularities. 1993 In the rescheduled multi-party presidential elections, Ange Felix Patas is elected president, defeating Kalingba and Dacko. October 1999 President Patas is re-elected, with 51.6% of the vote. March 2003 Bozize, backed by Chad, seizes power while Patas is abroad. Bozize is elected president in 2005. September 25, 2007, the United Nations Security Council passes Resolution 1778, which establishes the peacekeeping Operation MINURCAT, the United Nations mission in the Central African Republic and Chad. The mission's mandate ends on December 31, 2010. January 23, 2011, Bozize is re-elected despite allegations of fraud by election observers. October 14, 2011, in a letter to U.S. Speaker of the House John Boehner, U.S. President Barack Obama says he is sending about 100 U.S. troops to Central Africa to provide them with assistance in hunting down Kony, the head of the Lord's Resistance Army. December 2012 Seleka, a coalition of predominantly Muslim rebel groups, stages attacks on several cities as they advance towards the capital Bangui. January 11, 2013 an agreement signed in Gabon's capital, Libreville, sets up a unity government headed by Bozize. Under the agreement, the Seleka and opposition party members will pick a prime minister, and legislative elections will take place in a year. March 2013, Seleka accuses Bazais of reneging on the peace deal and ousts him. Bazais flees to Cameroon and Michel Djitodia, a Seleka leader, declares himself president. April 13, 2013, the National Transitional Council confirms Djitodia as interim president. August 18, 2013, Djitodia is sworn in as interim president. He is considered the first Muslim head of state and the first from the northeast. September 2013, Djitodia officially disbands the Seleka coalition. December 5, 2013, the UN Security Council unanimously adopts Resolution 2127, which authorizes MISCA, the African-led international support mission in the Central African Republic, and the French peacekeeping troops already on the ground, to take all necessary measures to protect civilians and stabilize the country. December 2013, the African Union announces it will temporarily boost its troop levels in CAR to 6,000 soldiers. January 2014, as a result of the violence that has gripped CAR since March 2013, more than 935,000 people are internally displaced, and nearly 60% of them are children, according to UNHCR, the United Nations Refugee Agency. January 10, 2014, Djitodia and Prime Minister Nicolas Tiange resign amid pressure from African regional leaders. January 20, 2014, the National Transitional Council, CNT, elects Catherine Samba Panza as interim president. February 14, 2014, the European Union commits to sending 500 troops to CAR, a number that the coalition is planning to double, according to EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton. The EU's announcement follows France's statement that it will send 400 additional troops to join the 1,600 French personnel already deployed there. April 1, 2014, the European Union launches EUFOR-RCA, a military operation to help restore stability to CAR. April 10, 2014, the UN Security Council unanimously approves the creation of a UN peacekeeping force for CAR, where competing militias have been fighting for months. The Council approved the deployment of 11,800 peacekeepers to the country, where about 6,000 African-led peacekeeping forces and about 2,000 French troops already have been operating. Additionally, the European Union is planning to deploy up to 1,000 troops. April 30, 2015, French soldiers forced minors in CAR to perform sex acts on them in return for food or money, according to Paula Donovan, co-director of AIDS-Free World, citing a confidential UN report. The abuses were allegedly committed against a dozen hungry, vulnerable children at a displaced persons camp at Mpoko International Airport in Bangui, the capital of CAR, between December 2013 and June 2014. May 7, 2015, the Paris prosecutor's office announces a judicial investigation against unnamed persons accused of charges of rapes on minors, aged under 15 years, or complicity in this, by people abusing the authority conferred by their functions. August 12, 2015, a day after Amnesty International details allegations of the rape of a 12-year-old girl and indiscriminate killings by UN peacekeeping forces in CAR, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon requests and accepts the resignation of Babacar Gaye, head of UN peacekeepers in the Central African Republic. August 19, 2015, a UN spokeswoman says 3 additional people, including a minor, have accused UN peacekeepers working in CAR of rape. Since the UN established a force in the country in April 2014, there have been 14 allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse by peacekeepers, including the 3 new accusations. September 15, 2015, the UN announces it has received a new allegation of sexual abuse against a UN peacekeeper working in CAR. January 20, 2016, nearly 2.5 million people, about half of the country's population, are facing hunger, the UN says after completing an emergency food security assessment. The number of those suffering from hunger has doubled from a year earlier, the UN says. February 4, 2016, Human Rights Watch says it has documented 8 sexual abuse allegations involving peacekeepers in CAR from October to December 2015. February 20, 2016, Faustin Archange Touadera, a former prime minister, is elected president, the country's elections authority says, with 62.7% of the vote. June 21, 2016, former Congolese Vice President Jean-Pierre Bemba is sentenced to 18 years in prison by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in CAR. He is convicted of murder, rape and pillaging between October 2002 and March 2003, when forces under his command were sent to Car to quell a coup attempt. Bemba's conviction is reversed on June 8, 2018. August 7, 2017, UN Humanitarian Chief Stephen O'Brien, after a visit to the country, reports that violence is intensifying and that the early warning signs of a genocide are there. Much more humanitarian support is needed, he says. October 5, 2017, a Human Rights Watch report says that armed groups in the country have used rape and sexual slavery as a tactic of war across the country during nearly 5 years of conflict. June 21, 2019, a 50-year-old priest, Father Luc Delft, is removed from his post in the Car after CNN reveals new child sex abuse accusations against him to his superiors in the Salesians of Don Bosco, a religious order established specifically to protect children. Father Luc Delft, who had been convicted in Europe before going to work as the countrywide director of the Catholic charity Caritas, is accused of abusing at least 2 boys in the Car. The new allegations come after a year-long CNN investigation. November 21, 2019, after CNN publishes their investigation into Delft, Caritas Internationalis, a network of Catholic charitable organizations, urges its regional branches to vet their staff and volunteers. The statement posted to their website claims that both civil and religious authorities have been notified and are investigating the allegations. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A Central African Republic police officer chases looters attacking a broken-down truck Friday, February 7, in the capital of Bangui. The country, a former French colony, was plunged into chaos last year after a coalition of mostly Muslim rebels ousted President François Bozize. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Members of the Central African Armed Forces lynch a man suspected of being a former Seleka rebel Wednesday, February 5, in Bangui. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A Central African Armed Forces member kicks the man suspected of being a former Seleka rebel. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A woman runs for cover as heavy gunfire erupts in the Miskin district of Bangui on Monday, February 3. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Men take cover in a restroom as heavy gunfire erupts in Miskin on February 3. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A man screams after being arrested in downtown Bangui on Saturday, February 1. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A Christian fighter walks by houses burned by ex-Seleka forces in Bagaura, a small town in the Central African Republic, on Sunday, January 19. The Seleka have been forced out of power since the coup, but Christian militias, known as the Anti-Balaka, have been allowed to fill the power vacuum, Amnesty International said, with dire consequences for Muslim civilians. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Muslim civilians prepare to board trucks in Bangui to flee the capital on Saturday, January 18. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A truck packed with Muslim civilians and their belongings leaves Bangui on January 18. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Security volunteers use sticks to fend off people trying to enter a food and supplies distribution point at a makeshift camp at Bangui Mpoko International Airport on Thursday, January 9. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A French soldier waves to children as his jeep patrols the area between an airstrip and a makeshift displacement camp at Mpoko International Airport on January 9. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A French soldier and an African Union peacekeeper from Burundi patrol the Galabaja district of Bangui on Saturday, January 4. While insecurity continued to reign in many areas of the city, certain neighborhoods were tentatively reopening and some residents returning, at least during daylight hours. Crisis in the Central African Republic. An African Union peacekeeper from Burundi participates in a joint patrol with French forces in the Fao neighborhood of Bangui on January 4. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Displaced people walk amid makeshift shelters at a camp abutting Mpoko International Airport on January 4. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Children crowd around a volunteer who's distributing rice porridge at a makeshift camp at Mpoko International Airport on Friday, January 3. Escalating violence in the Central African Republic is posing a threat to children, with at least 2 beheaded and thousands recruited as soldiers, the United Nations said. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French Defense Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian, center-right, speaks to a wounded soldier in a medical tent during a visit to the Mpoko camp in Bangui on Thursday, January 2. France has sent 1,600 troops into the Central African Republic to assist African troops. Crisis in the Central African Republic. People displaced by violence attempt to create a semblance of normal life in a sprawling camp at Mboum International Airport on January 2. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A medical worker checks the injuries of a man who has been struck by gunfire. The man was treated at a Doctors Without Borders clinic inside a makeshift camp in Bangui on January 2. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A member of an armed neighborhood defense squad, which residents say is local Christian residents protecting themselves, carries a machete as he walks near a roadblock in Bangui on Tuesday, December 31. Crisis in the Central African Republic. People wait for evacuation flights in a hangar at the airport in Bangui on Sunday, December 29. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Displaced young people use a tree branch to climb a wall in Bangui on Saturday, December 28. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A man carries beams stripped from a Bangui house, back left, which is said to have belonged to a Salika officer who had been attacking the surrounding Christian population. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French soldiers patrol the Fao district in Bangui on December 28. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A man walks on a roof beam in Bangui on December 28 as local residents tear apart a house said to have belonged to a Salika officer. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Angry Christians shout at a truck of fleeing Muslims in the Kabongo neighborhood of Bangui on Friday, December 27. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A young boy watches as people hurl rocks at passing vehicles carrying Muslims in the Kabongo neighborhood, December 27. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Muslims are taunted by Christians when their truck breaks down in the Kabongo neighborhood of Bangui. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Cameroonians wait in line to board an evacuation flight at Mboum International Airport, which is guarded by French soldiers on December 27. Military escorts shuttle citizens of Chad and Cameroon to the airport Friday to board evacuation flights as French troops stepped in to help Muslims fleeing north by road. Crisis in the Central African Republic. An African Union peacekeeper carries an elderly Cameroonian woman to a military vehicle in Bangui on December 27. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A young man who was hit in the back by a stray bullet cries out in pain at a Doctors Without Borders clinic in Bangui on Wednesday, December 25. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A militiaman holds a knife as he describes a recent attack in Bangui on Tuesday, December 24. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A motorcycle passes the remains of a mosque that was destroyed in Bangui in December. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French soldiers frisk a man at a checkpoint in Bangui on December 23. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French troops and civilians try to comfort a crying boy near the airport in Bangui on December 23. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French soldiers load a wounded man onto the front of a military vehicle to get medical help in Bangui on December 23. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Displaced people sit with their belongings at a makeshift camp housing thousands in Bangui on Saturday, December 21. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A boy looks out the broken window of a plane being used as shelter at Mboum International Airport on December 21. Crisis in the Central African Republic. The body of a suspected militiaman lies in the road near a charred car in Bangui on Friday, December 20. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Christian men tear off pieces of the Kabango Mosque in Bangui on December 20. Crisis in the Central African Republic. People watch as French soldiers hold their position on a street in Bangui after hearing gunshots on December 20. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French troops patrol the Baya district of Bangui on December 20. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Tents are set up at a refugee camp near the airport in Bangui on Thursday, December 19. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A man carries a bag of food at a Christian refugee camp in Basangoa, Central African Republic, on December 19. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A boy scarred from a machete attack waits at a pediatric hospital in Bangui on Wednesday, December 18. Crisis in the Central African Republic. An African Union peacekeeper stands on a chair December 18 as a small child sits on the floor of an Islamic center where refugees have sought protection in Bangui. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A severely malnourished child lays by his mother at a pediatric center in Bangui on Tuesday, December 17. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A French soldier patrols the Castor neighborhood of Bangui on Monday, December 16. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French troops patrol a street of the Muslim PK5 district in Bangui on December 16. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Former soldiers linked to Christian militiamen rest Sunday, December 15, in a camp set up in a Bangui school. Christian vigilante groups formed to battle Salika, the predominantly Muslim coalition behind the March removal of President François Bozize. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French soldiers patrol the streets of Baya, Central African Republic, on December 15. Crisis in the Central African Republic. The Archbishop of Bangui, Dieudonné Nzapalainga, preaches on Saturday, December 14, to people gathering at a refugee camp close to the Bangui airport. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Members of a militia opposed to the Salika pose with weapons and amulets in the Boyer Abe neighborhood in Bangui on December 14. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A Salika presidential guardsman smokes at the downtown market in Bangui on December 14. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Christians at the Bangui airport gather in a makeshift camp for internally displaced people on Friday, December 13. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Muslim men rough up a Christian man while checking him for weapons December 13 in Bangui. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Peacekeeping troops from the multinational force of Central Africa shoot as they attempt to evacuate Muslim clerics from the Saint Jacques Church in Bangui on Thursday, December 12. An angry crowd had gathered outside the church following rumors that a Salika general was inside. Crisis in the Central African Republic. The bodies of 16 Muslim men are loaded onto a truck at the Nour Islam Mosque before being transported for burial in Bangui on Wednesday, December 11. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A young woman holds her baby at an elementary school in the Muslim district of Bangui on December 11. Crisis in the Central African Republic. People pray as they bury 16 coffins in a Muslim cemetery in Bangui on December 11. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French troops detain a suspected Salika officer, preventing a Christian mob from lynching him, in Bangui on Monday, December 9. The mission of the peacekeeping force is to protect civilians in the Central African Republic, restore humanitarian access and stabilize the country. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French soldiers arrest an alleged ex-Salika rebel in a neighborhood near the Bangui airport on December 9. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A man runs from gunfire December 9 during a disarmament operation by French soldiers in Bangui. Crisis in the Central African Republic. People gather around an alleged ex-Salika rebel as he is arrested by French soldiers in Bangui on December 9. Crisis in the Central African Republic. People walk by a French soldier standing guard during a disarmament operation in Bangui on December 9. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A French soldier stands guard after the arrest of ex-Salika rebels in a neighborhood near Bangui's airport on December 9. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French soldiers stand guard near a man they have arrested in Bangui on December 9. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French troops walk past two Salika vehicles suspected of being set on fire by Christian mobs in Bangui. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A French soldier speaks to a suspected Christian militia member who was wounded by a machete in the Kokoro neighborhood of Bangui on December 9. Vigilante crowd said they spotted him with grenades and turned him into French forces. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Mobs of Christians grab a child holding a knife in Bangui on December 9. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Children attend a mass given by the Archbishop of Bangui at St. Paul's Parish on Sunday, December 8. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Children ask for biscuits at a base camp held by the French military in Bosambel, Central African Republic, on December 8. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Red Cross employees stand amid dozens of bodies at the morgue in Bangui on December 8. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Michel Djitodia, the country's president who had been one of the Salika leaders, gives a press conference in his Bangui office on December 8. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A displaced child walks in Bangui on December 8. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Relatives of Thyri Treacer Mbedi, who died from bullet wounds to the neck and stomach, grieve outside his home in Bangui on Saturday, December 7. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A former member of the militia that led the coup against the Central African Republic's president sits next to a machine gun as he and others stand guard at a shutdown market in Bangui on December 7. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Children play inside Bangui St. Bernard Church, where their families took refuge following the wave of deadly violence on December 7. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French soldiers patrol a road in Bayoro, Central African Republic, on December 7 as part of the military operation aiming at restoring security in the country. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A French soldier watches the road in Bayoro on December 7. Crisis in the Central African Republic. People grieve for a man killed in Bangui on December 7. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Women push a coffin in the streets of Bangui on December 7. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A French helicopter lands at a base camp in Cameroon on Friday, December 6. Crisis in the Central African Republic. The UN Security Council votes Thursday, December 5, to authorize increased military action in the Central African Republic. The resolution, put forward by France, authorized an African Union-led peacekeeping force to intervene with the support of French troops. Crisis in the Central African Republic. People stand near bodies found lying in a mosque and in its surrounding streets in Bangui on December 5. Crisis in the Central African Republic. French military forces drive in Cameroon on December 5. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Civilians wait for treatment at Bangui's hospital after a day-long gun battle between Seleka soldiers and Christian militias on December 5. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A nurse tends to the wounded at Bangui's hospital on December 5. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Seleka soldiers race through Bangui as gunfire and mortar rounds erupt in the capital December 5. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Wounded civilians lie on the floor of Bangui's hospital on December 5. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Seleka soldiers patrol Bangui on December 5. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A severely wounded man lies unattended in a Bangui mosque December 5. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Shrouded bodies are seen in a Bangui mosque December 5. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Civilians seek shelter in a Catholic church in Bangui on December 5. Crisis in the Central African Republic. A Seleka soldier is briefed while manning a checkpoint in Boli, Central African Republic, on Wednesday, December 4. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Christians from the village of Bouabou load up on a taxi as they flee violence on December 4. Crisis in the Central African Republic. Christian children from Bouabou are packed in the trunk of a taxi as they flee violence December 4. Click subscribe to receive the latest news.